issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, and the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 12 people for the violence in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.
Media freedom all over the world, and especially in Africa, has always been a major source of concern, with journalists facing brutality, incarceration, and threats to life due to the prevalence of strong men at the detriment of weak institutions. Now, with the advent of COVID-19 debacle, watchers say this has further aggravated or compounded the issues. Now, in today's edition of The Agenda, we look at the looming question, which is, has COVID-19 further curbed media freedoms across the continent? Well, thank you for joining us on today's edition of The Agenda. My name is Henry Williams, and this is what we'll be discussing further on today's edition of the show. But before we go to do that, let me let our viewers know that you can also watch us on the go when you log on to our website at www.loveworldplus.tv, or go to any of the online stores to download our app, Love World Plus. Now, without out of the way, I can bring in my guest who joins me today on today's edition of the show, Adeni Kunu, a journalist of repute and with a wealth of influence and knowledge on African issues. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's another opportunity, Nee, for us to look at what is happening when it concerns press freedom.
Yeah.
Media is a very strong tool for information dissemination, especially in these climes with the advent of COVID-19.
Yes, of course, it is. Anytime we talk about the Freedom of Information Act, we have to look at one of the initiatives of the United Nations, basically.
Okay, you hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll take a quick break now. When we come back, the agenda will continue. Don't go away. All right, great to have you back on the agenda. We'll be discussing issues that borders around the freedom of the fourth estate of the realm, and talking about media freedom here in Africa. With the advent of COVID-19, has this posed a challenge to freedom and limits of the media? This is what we'll be looking at on the show, and joining me on today's edition is Adeni Kunu. Great to have you join me, Adeni.
Thank you once again. I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Yes, and also we'll be looking forward to having another journalist join us online, and that is Aderisola Adebanjo, who is an expert at digital journalism. She has her own part to play in this discussion. Before we delve into today's discussion, let's take you on a journey talking about this issue. The media freedom all over the world, and especially in Africa, has also always been a major source of concern, with journalists facing brutality, incarceration, and threats to life due to prevalence of strong men at the detriment of weak institutions. We take a look at this and more in this report, and we'll be right back. Don't go away.
I've done nothing wrong. I've just been persecuted for putting out the corruption stories.
In Africa, as elsewhere, mass media has seen increasing opportunities and threats. New technologies have made it easier for information to be shared widely and cheaply, resulting in a proliferation and diversification of information sources. Broader populations can now access content more easily and cheaply than ever before, and contribute to the media space themselves through call-in programs on vernacular radio stations, internet news sites and blogs, and social media such as WhatsApp and Twitter, making it difficult for injustices like human rights abuse by authoritarian regimes or police brutality to go unnoticed. However, the flip side is new competition and access to cost-free content threaten media organizations' bottom lines. Consumer skepticism of media actors has skyrocketed as more people see media as propagators of falsehoods, bias, and hate speech, particularly when messages are critical of politicians or policies they support.
Concerned about trouble and trending irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Politicians in democracies as well as authoritarian regimes are more than happy to stoke this anger, which provides opportunity for government to launch increasingly brazen legal and extra-legal attacks on media at times, calling it hate speech. Prominent media watchdogs such as Freedom House, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Reporters Without Borders have documented increases in government regulations, censorship, and even violence against media actors in Africa and around the world.
We're seeing countries cracking down on journalists and freedom of expression at this time when they're also trying to control the spread of COVID-19. So we're seeing existing laws being used. So, for instance, false news laws to arrest journalists in Somalia who tried to report on COVID-19. Similarly, in Ethiopia, we recently had a journalist who was arrested allegedly for publishing false news and is now being charged under Ethiopia's disinformation law. At the same time, the worst jailer of journalists is in this region. The worst jailer of journalists in sub-Saharan Africa is in this region, that's Eritrea. And Eritrea retains at least 16 journalists behind bars, as far as we can tell this year. Of course, this is incredibly worrying for us.
With the regime of sweeping powers brought on by the COVID-19 debacle, what does this portend for the future of media freedom in Africa?
All right, and the issue is with, arbitrary censorship, especially on the internet by means of ad hoc internet cuts in some countries, arrests of journalists on the grounds of combating terrorism and acts of violence against media personnel that usually go completely unpunished. What is the future for media freedom? I want to turn to Nii right now.
Yes,
a question, comes to mind is this a legitimate discussion when we talk about media freedom, especially in these climes?
Well, there couldn't be anything that is more legitimate other than to talk about it. It is more or less like a man and wife with children not talking about how to bring up their kids. That would be grossly irresponsible of the parents to do that. And they say he who feels it or she who feels it knows it. As it is, this has to do with the media circles. And that is supposed to be an agency of government that is the watchdog of government and is not a part of the government. Is involved with the affairs of the nation or governance, but is not part of actually the administering of any state. It therefore is a very germane discussion. But it's also important to really understand the backdrop of why on the 28th of May 2011, the president, then Goodluck Jonathan, signed the bill to become an act that is actually an extension of Section 39 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and of course Article 19 of the United Nations, talking about Charter on Freedom and the rest of it all as well. So having said that, I think it is because the international community itself has actually looked at a lot of things and considered that there is tendency for recklessness. And we need an agency that really will be able to allow sanity come into the recklessness that oftentimes characterize governance. If you check checks and balances within governance, you find out that there are extents that the executive, the legislators, or the judiciary members wouldn't go. But the first estate of the realm has that privilege of going to every nooks and crannies without fear of favor. And that is why many of us who are actually within the journalistic circles, as it were, should know that we are chosen to hold something sacred aloft so that we can really try shaping society. It has become very, very important. But many people only feel that it's a prestigious job, or perhaps there are certain things they could get, maybe be in the limelight, get seen, and the rest of it all. But
and abandon the true ethics of the profession.
Yes, and that is why you find out that even what we see on social media is indicative of the kind of thing that you might have in certain media circles, if at all certain influences are within their operational system. So that said, again, we move further to the things that we should have achieved with the Freedom of Information Act in itself. And I have to say, the report actually tied it to COVID. But before I talk about COVID, I'd like to say that before the exit of the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, God bless his soul, there were a lot of clampdowns. Many journalists were maimed, some were killed, and all of that. And at the height of the trouble, they had to shut the internet. They shut down the internet because they felt when people are informed of what is happening in this part of the country and to know certain pieces of information on that part of the country, it will strengthen the people and make their resolve, very, very unwavering. It will make it win. If you came to Ethiopia, just about, some months back and before they had the current leader of Ethiopia, there were also things of that nature where at the slightest uproar against certain things that are done against governments, they shut down the internet. So it tells you how dangerous the media is to administrations that are intolerant, that are subversive, and of course that are despotic in nature. And that is it. Because if they understood that one of the freest of all privileges of human being is freedom, nobody goes to shut down the internet. It therefore tells you then that apart from those state actors seeing the internet as something that actually affects them to have their way, we should also now look at the danger of using such platforms negatively.
Which we see playing out.
Most definitely. So the Freedom of Information Act that we have now is a document that should guide people, especially regarding procedures of getting certain pieces of information that you need, which has become very important.
But in spite of this, this bill that you're talking about, which is a very welcome development, how practical has it been in terms of walking and carrying out this empowerment has been given to journalists?
Okay,
I still find it like a camel going through the eye of a needle.
Well, but the camel, according to that part of scripture, eventually went through the eye of the needle. Of course, the camel might have lost weight because you have to really press the camel through it. Anyway, we're just talking metaphorics now. Now let's get back to the literal sense of it. I asked people at the outset of this COVID that if you were tested and you have your results having been tested negative, or positive, I should say, I'd like to see the reports.
Let's start from this perspective.
Yes, please.
Has COVID brought in a new regime of crackdown on information?
Yes.
That is where
I think I'll say yes, because from the report played, it's very obvious that the COVID has actually brought, perhaps maybe the clampdown has not been so seen on mainstream media in Nigeria, but in countries of Africa, it's been happening.
Africa. And why do you think so? Why has it been somehow managed in that sense? Could it be that it's been compromised to a large extent?
Well, if you look at the fact that in the US as well as in the UK, there are confirmed reports of people inflating figures of those who tested positive, and of those who never even took the test, and of those who were negative and suddenly they were called and they were positive. It's there. It's an open information that if you dug a little deeper, you could actually get what is happening. It tells you then that there is something more than meets the eyes, and that is the reason we cannot relent at this point, because science is supposed to be honorable. It's about life, and we understand that life is sacred. So for the people within the medical profession who understand the sacredness of life, they should know better than to tell a lie about the health status of any individual. It therefore means that for every part or for every person who is part of the pandemic scheme that some people have called plandemic,
how do you say, merchandise?
Merchandise, because if you look at it, they say follow the money. Oftentimes the motivations for all these discrepancies that really has resulted in lots of loss of lives than saving the life that shouldn't have been lost is because some people have sold their souls to Satan. I should say that very clearly here. And I think that for those of us who have the privilege of getting the information out, our job has been made very open. They've actually been, our terms of references are clear. We have to speak to the issues. So to begin with, COVID-19 is very real. Nobody should dispute its existence. But if we agree that the flu still kills more people every year than the pandemic, and for instance, every year, about 800,000 children get missing in the U.S., and they don't get to see them any longer.
About 7,000 people plus die daily from malaria in Africa.
So that's another thing. So if we do a computation of these figures, we'll find out that there are other serious issues affecting us than this. And I think that people should begin to ask themselves questions. The privilege that every human being has, except if you've got some mental suasion, is that you can think. When somebody tells you that 1 is 4, you have the ability to ask, please, what are the 3 others? So I think that the questions that should be asked are not being asked because the people who perhaps are funding those who are telling these lies are really very powerful. They've got deep pockets. But of course, we know that only a stone killed Goliath, so we cannot relent on trying to throw the stone that can kill the enemies of the world.
That gives us some hope here.
Yes, it does.
Okay, now let's talk about the issue of media freedoms. How does May the 20th, a media or a press release saying front page, Inspector General of Police bars journalist movement during lockdown, and another headline comes out, IGP ignores Buhari's directive, bars journalists, doctors, others, giving directive to zonal assistant inspectors of police not during a virtual conference, not to allow, journalists free movement. I mean, we can have that slide. I mean, just what could be the moral justification, knowing the role of the press in crimes like this?
Well, don't be deceived. It is not everybody who finds himself or herself in any of those places that really understand the role of the media. In my recent journey, for instance, I had to take a road trip between Lagos and the south part of Nigeria, and we traveled late, and I told them, this is who I am, this is what I do. The police officer told me that he just prevented a guy from crossing the border that even had a presidential letter of approval. I looked at him, I smiled and said, "Oh, God, relax." Obviously, he's a very poorly informed officer. And that has to do with the leadership of any of the security operations or operatives that we have. The primary responsibility of leadership is to actually lead the agenda of how people get information and respond to such information. At the moment, we're talking about an over 11-kilometer bridge that is on partial lockdown for 3 months on one side, 3 months on the other, making it 6. Before that time, as much as we learned that the bridge will be closed down for repairs, talking about the Third Mainland Bridge, much sensitization with education were not sufficient. So that simply means if you have a major challenge, such as we have, as they have described it, the COVID-19, a lot of sensitization and education must go into your preparations towards helping the citizens know how to respond.
Yes.
And the interesting part is before the citizens get into the circle of making them comply to these rules, security operatives are briefed first. So they have the privilege of getting this information ahead of the general populace.
We find, if I may comment,
yes,
we find a huge gulf in terms of collaboration and cooperation between the journalists and security operatives.
Well,
why is it so? Why does it seem, and this doesn't seem to be actually, seems to be extending even further?
Let me say this. You wouldn't get the best out of security operatives if you actually want to do something as a group. Oftentimes, the privileges people have is to what? To deal with the individual person within the rank and file of the security operatives. Let me give you a picture. That's about 3 months ago, before this COVID-19, there was an announcement by the Nigerian Army that they'd like some journalists to, because oftentimes what they often report are press releases. And we've told many journalists that, you cannot continue to report press releases. You cannot continue to tell the world that they said 10 people died, 16 people escaped, and you're comfortable with that. You have to be out there so that you can bring the information that you gathered in. And I sent a message. They asked, okay, I sent a message to a particular number of Colonel Seguramos. I told them, okay, please, I'm interested. They asked for certain documentations. I sent it to them because I really want to go to the theater. and see what's happening so that I can bring the on-the-spot account of what's happening there. Maybe they will reply next year. I wouldn't know.
Next year.
So it tells you that there are times some of our people here are very, 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 I think at times the kind of response you'd expect from them, especially those within the administration, not peculiar to this administration anyway, because government is in continuum, they really don't do what they should do. And that is where I have my concerns. It means, again, that the media ownership, media operations, media financing, please take note of what I said. Media ownership, media operations, media financing must be looked at, because oftentimes we're talking about media ownership, which is oftentimes tied to media financing. There's always some loggerhead with media operations, because the professional will tell you this is how best it could be done. The owner, who is oftentimes the financier, tells you this is the direction we must go.
Because the piper pays the
yes, and exactly, and it gets worse if you have an owner, a financier who doesn't listen. Because in the first place, no man knows it all. No matter how intelligent somebody is, you could share ideas, but I don't think that an individual could be as intelligent as 10 very brilliant people as well. Because obviously a pool of their resource, mental resource, will outweigh yours. So when we talk about the media, in our relationship with those in power, bringing it into COVID-19, I think very strongly that the media owner, financier, and operations have a lot to do with doing what is right as far as COVID is concerned. On the flip of it will be the resolve by those of us who are on the field, the media professionals, that, okay, these are the ethics of this profession that we have decided to be part of. Let me tell you this, and that is a fact. The brown envelope syndrome is here with us. And it is not peculiar to Nigeria. It is just that you do not get to see brown envelopes or alerts in the form of the alert you see. There's some group of people called the lobbyists in the United States of America.
Is it more prevalent in Africa, talking about brown envelope?
If we check the volume, it is not. If we were to do the exchange rate of the dollar compared to what some people get across the world, it is not. Only recently, for instance, in the United Kingdom, the lawmakers there said, one of them, I'm trying to remember where the region she's representing, she talked about the fact that multinational organizations that default in their tax payments suddenly will send flowers, will send lunch, will send some gifts. And when they send these, they say, please support our motion, blah, 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 when we are going to bring an issue up. Now, she said she doesn't know how many of our colleagues, if I could find out, maybe next time I'll share, that she doesn't know how many of our colleagues also get this gift. They just bring the gift, very lovely chocolate bar. You know, they seem to know people's weaknesses. So they put it at your door, or they send it with flowers, good write-up, and they tell you, support us this. And eventually you find out that a company that might be owing up to 200 million pounds in tax could be allowed to pay only 40 million tax. 40 million pounds. So what happens to 360 million pounds that should have been paid out of 400 million pounds? I'm saying here that oftentimes the media, who for instance would have gone after such stories, or the individual who also is in the eye of the storm, have a lot to do. For that kind of lawmaker, she's going to be receptive to interviews that reveals the malfeasance of people who should do better than a media owner or practitioner who countenance the let's go, leave them ideology. So these things are very critical in these times, and until we learn to do the job right, I think we've got a very long way to go.
Nee, let's look at the advent of social media.
Okay.
It's a very powerful tool, an instrument of information. Some traditional media platforms bemoan the fact that the era of the gatekeeper is gradually fading away because you have alternative sources of information, which makes it more difficult to check. And this has actually given more vent to governments who want to clamp down on, media freedoms in terms of, because of fake news and all of that. Is it a legitimate call to say the demand to, curb these freedoms is a right way to go?
Well, I wouldn't say it's right. As much as I support governments sharing ideas on how best for people to use their free spaces.
It's called regulation of the system.
It could be called regulations, but at times when you talk about regulation, but we've seen where they shut them down. That can't be regulation, that is control, state control. Don't forget, the phones belong to them. And you have a right to own property in this country. Some people's phones are their property. Yeah. So it doesn't belong to organizations. You have a right to own property. And you have the right, where you are born free, to also use the property you have as you deem fit. But I have to say here that government appears not to understand that they've got a big job. If you realize as a government that people are beginning to get very reckless in their use of these engaging devices, I think that the strategy or the blueprint for making people stay sane is to look at the institutions that are highly respected within the media circles or personalities and actually engage them over a very good period of time to be consistently in the face of the citizenry so as to let them be responsible in the use of these devices.
Why? Because the pros outweigh the cons?
The pros far outweigh the cons. If you look at it, a lot of people who never had proper formal education have to a great extent been able to actually change their outlook on life by virtue of the access they have. So that simply means some people that might not be able to stay awake at 10 p.m. or 12 at midnight to listen to certain things are able to have access to certain things on the go, broaden their horizon, are not limited. Then you talked about the gatekeeper. The gatekeepers are still there. And the gatekeepers, in my own assessment, could not and will never be government. Because don't forget that government is an institution of very unfaithful practices, very, discouraging things that come from government as well. I'm not saying that government is entire evil. No, we need governance.
Based on its antecedents.
Yeah, the antecedents, and it's not Nigeria alone. We're talking universal now. Yeah. There are lots of things happening across the world that could make you say very authoritatively that government across the world, governments have not lived up to their billing. So because of the faults found with government, they should stay aside and engage people. There are always strategies. And there are times we tell them, if we're on platforms like this, that we are open to consultations regarding responsible use of even of social platforms. Because if you don't allow people who really understand their onions within the journalism circles, they are not able to engage with people. You can imagine, for instance, you're here. Over time or over the years, you've been able to impact lots of people positively. If government comes to you and say, hey, please, we want people to be responsible, are there things you could do that make people understand how best to use their devices? It is their right, we know, and we do not want to infringe upon what is their right or what are their rights. Could you help us steer people in positive direction so that it can result in nation building and in everything? I think that would have been right. But quickly getting legislation in place to sanction people with fines, to perhaps arrest some people, I think you're going to make beasts of human beings. And we're supposed to be Homo sapiens according to what evolution has told us. But I think we're humans and can reason if properly addressed on these issues.
All right, in case you just joined us, you're watching The Agenda. We're looking at media freedom in the advent of the COVID-19 debacle. How has it been? Has it curbed media freedoms and freedom of information? This is what we've been delving into. And when we come back, we'll be looking into ratings by Afrobarometer on nations' freedom of information, and where some nations like Nigeria fall into the log, and we're also looking at other incidences of media freedom restrictions. Don't go away, you're still watching The Agenda. We'll be right back.
From Lagos
to Tokyo, from Dakar to Moscow,
we have all the world covered for you, no matter where you are.
Lover Plus News is at the heart of it all.
The prayers of many saints will be answered this time.
We bring you our perspective of stories behind the story.
So, and the Bible shows us how hyperinflation will set in. Jesus said, pray that you be counted worthy to escape all these things.
Join us, join us.
Join us on this station.
we must remember that every one of us has something to give, something to contribute. Only Nigerians can help develop Nigeria. All that we require in our nation for our prosperity, our security, our progress will come from within us, and therefore each one of us must be ready and willing to be a vital part of it.
All right, great to have you back. You're still watching The Agenda, and don't forget you can watch us logging to our website at www.loveworldplus.tv or go to any of the online stores to download our app, Love World Plus. And you'll be talking a lot about media freedom and freedom of information brought on by the COVID-19 challenge. How has it been so far? Has it been on the decline, or has it been better? And that's what we've been discussing here on the show. We're meant to join, have a journalist, a digital journalist, Darin Sola Adebanjo, join us from Abuja. It seems we're having some connection challenges. I hope we can get her before the show is over, but nothing to fear, nothing to worry. We have Nii Kunu here with me in the studio. Yeah. Thanks for being here, Nii, once more. We've been talking a lot about these issues and talking about how free media has been so far, especially in the COVID-19 challenge brought on the continent. But there's no doubt about it, there are incidences that are undeniable of brutality against journalists. Yes. Let's take a look at this report. A Zimbabwe journalist says he is being persecuted for exposing corruption. A prominent investigative journalist in Zimbabwe who was arrested last week says he's being persecuted for exposing corruption. 49-year-old Chino Ono was detained Monday last week and has been held in police custody since. Let's take a look.
Zimbabwean award-winning journalist and government critic Hopewell Chingono appeared in court on Wednesday, where he was charged with incitement to public violence. Alongside opposition leader Jacob Ngarivume, Chingono is accused of conspiring to mobilize anti-government protests planned for July 31.
Particular, his phone was taken. I'm in good spirits. I've done nothing wrong. I've just been persecuted for putting out the corruption stories. So I'm not worried.
The prominent documentary filmmaker has been using Twitter to expose corruption linked to government purchases of coronavirus protection gear and test kits.
So yesterday there was a stalemate over the issue of the search warrant where they wanted to seize Hopewell's film equipment. This camera has absolutely nothing to do with the allegations brought against him, which are related to tweets. So we really don't understand what this is all about. It seems clear that it's just about trying to cripple him as a journalist.
The case comes ahead of the July 31 demonstration, which was de facto banned on Tuesday after President Mnangagwa imposed a dusk to dawn curfew and reinstated a coronavirus lockdown. Hopewell Chingono's case is the latest in a string of arrests of government critics as political tensions rise over state corruption and the country's economic crisis.
All right, looking at that report, Nii, analysts on Watchers say that the COVID-19 has been more of a cash cow in these climes. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's no way people won't want to take advantage of certain situations. And oftentimes I've heard people say when there's a problem, that problem becomes opportunity for some people. Well, you could do such things when you're talking about non-humans, but whatever concerns the life of human beings, I think anything that makes a man who knows better to subvert what should give life and health to the next man cannot be said to still have his or her humanity intact. For somebody who came out to say XYZ was meant for this procurement, but WKO actually happens to be what has been spent. I think that the only thing you could do is you could just write an open letter. You said this, right? Do you have your facts?
Exactly.
But you see, they are very uncomfortable because he had his facts. And he would, I believe, with his lawyer, reveal those facts, even if they don't eventually get to know what the sources are. Let's understand that Zimbabwe, characteristically, has not gotten out of military rule. And that is where the international connivance comes in, because I felt that if many international bodies actually are interested in helping Zimbabwe get out of the quagmire of bad leadership, they would not have really supported Emerson Mnangagwa that actually came in through a coup. Don't forget that man is less than 3 years as an army, top army ranking officer.
So he's just taken off his uniform.
He just took off his uniform and decided to put on the attire, as it were, civil outfit. He's essentially a dictator. And no matter what anybody wants to say, for somebody who has been with Mugabe all these years, I'm asking what new ideology. I believe he's over 70.
Is it about his military past, or is it about the personality itself? Because when you look at issues like that, you look at countries like Nigeria, where a governor in Cross River State, Benayade, incarcerates a journalist, Agba Jalingo, just for making allegations against him and charges him with treason. I mean, how do you justify that?
Don't forget that
military background.
Up until this moment, there were lots of denials made. He said he's done a lot to get him out as of that time. I think it has to do with hurting their ego, that you cannot talk to me as the first citizen of the state the way you're talking to me. How dare you also reveal certain things? Don't forget the question Agba Jalingo asked was very simple. 500 million was meant for the microfinance bank of Cross River State. Please, how was the money disbursed? Simple question. And I expect that, or I expected back then, that the person who happens to be government will say, okay, yes, we spent A, Y, Z on this. So I think that we really must consider how we have moved to this point. And don't forget, in all of these happenings, media professionals are part of those not allowing everybody stand as one. Because why?
I was about to come to that. When you talk about this issue, there seems to be some amongst our ranks who have actually have allowed this to happen.
Why don't you say they have sold out? Just don't start quoting the words. They've sold out. And that is it.
And how does that affect the fight?
Well, it does affect the fight because most of those people who sell out are in positions of influence or power or control in these media organizations. And that's a fact. Let me tell you, I have two very good friends who left the organizations because they went and worked very hard on very fantastic reports. So they brought the report out, and of course it has to be vetted, only for them to be told, not at all. No, that won't fly. And the guy said, I've worked so hard to get this out. Is there any reason? He said, you work for us. You can't let it fly. And the person did what? Pushed it aside. Two people, and they left the media organization. And many others are still there because they believe that nobody's going to butter our bread if we left. But I respect their courage because it comes with some inconveniences I should say. But I respect the fact that they stood for something, because oftentimes, if we don't have what we stand for, the impact we are supposed to have, these impacts do not really come. And that is why we must endeavor. See, let me tell you this. I think it's high time we told ourselves the truth in any walk of life we find ourselves, or even because within the context of this discussion as media professionals. There are certain things we just shouldn't do because the supersensible has its own layers. There are horizons within the cosmic region. And there are certain things you do which appears to fill the bank of your own shelf or of your own vault in the cosmic. So if you don't have positives, you don't have the right thing, then even the energy given off by negatives also affect the generality of people beginning with you. People could say, okay, you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about religion. Yes, it's part of us. Even if you're not Christian, you're not Muslim, whatever affiliation that you think you claim to have, let us understand that the world we live in operates in certain ways. And there are certain things you shouldn't do, especially when it affects your fellow human. Right. You could do certain things to animals, you could do certain things to trees, but when it comes to fellow human beings in whom you have blood flow, you've got to be very careful. So if we look at the fact that many people are in positions of power and influence and control within the media circles that have sold out, I think the battle is harder to fight if the enemy is within.
You know, I don't know if we have enough time to look at the Freedom House, freedom of information charts, where we see the number of nations and where they fall into countries like Nigeria, because I'm told our time is fast spent, and there you find it, and you can see Nigeria at 115. Now, on the flip side, when you look at the other chart where it has Rwanda in it, you find Rwanda was supposed to be one of the fastest developing nations, more like the El Dorado of Africa, at 155.
Well, I don't, there are certain similarities between Nigeria and, of course, Rwanda. Both countries are being led now by former military top guns. And if you check the 20-year history or the 21-year history of Nigeria's democracy, you find out that retired military generals have ruled us more.
Okay.
Excuse me, you see, I like us to understand.
We have to go.
We have to go right now.
We have to go. I really wish we had more time, because I'd like to find out what's the correlation between freedom of the press and development. That's a very critical question.
Okay, let me just, as we close, I'd like us to understand that the reason I'm in this studio is because I have a level of value to add. Wherever we find ourselves, the value we give is a function of the things that we have built over time within us. In 21 years of democracy in this country, those that were true academics had a period of 6 to 7 years. True people had 6 to 7 years. Then retired military officers had 13 years. Come on, it's a fact of the matter.
All right, and well, that's where we'll have to leave today's discussion, but it does continue on our website. We log on to www.loveworldplus.tv. We'd love to hear your contributions and your comments as well. Well, that's much we can take. I want to thank my guest, Nee. It's been great having you on today's edition of The Agenda. My name is Henry Williams, and leave you with these thoughts that only Africans can build Africa. Until we meet again, stay blessed and see you then. Bye-bye.
Poverty, strife, conflict, and corruption. These are common narratives on the continent. But this is another side untold, the side of wealth, riches, and the continent with most blessed resources. Until you change a man's thinking, you cannot change his life. Africa's story has been written by others. We need to own our challenges and solutions and write our stories. Only Africans can build Africa. My name is Henry Williams. Join me on The Agenda on Love World Plus.
Issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 12 people for the violence in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.